Better communication options do not automatically lead to better communication and accessibility. I still remember the time when there were no mobile phones. Almost everyone could be reached with just a few phone calls. Most people with a telephone connection were willing to pass messages to neighbors who were still without such a connection. Now, with emails, SMS, WhatsApps, etc., we seem more unreachable than ever. Wooden ships, iron crew, steel ships, wooden crew. This all has to do with the increased size of the world in which we act, which has increased enormously, while we cannot foresee the consequences of our actions, for example, internet orders from China or holiday flights. In this webinar, we look at the consequences of scaling up via smart technology on our psychological behavior and its consequences for a sustainable future. In the background, the relocation plays a role of my family and I, from the center of a big city to the countryside. Together with our youngest daughter, my wife and I moved last summer to a 1684 Saxon farm in the Dutch museum village of Oud-Aalden, where it's still possible to wander around and walk for hours in the Esdorp landscape. Through the monumental farm village, the Essen, the Brook Valley, the heath and the forests. Small scale which no longer exists in the Netherlands outside such living museums. Human is a pure quality organism that is relatively slow in reproduction. Currently almost 7.5% of all people who have ever lived is alive. The same percentage of all rats alive at once would lead to a huge shell covering the earth. With the invention of the printing press, we started to compensate this slow biological reproduction rate by exploring cultural, technical reproduction mechanisms. Economy emerged as an infinite growth from finite resources. While biology produces quality at the level of the human organism, the level of our technology output means quantity, large scale and diminishing diversity. Think of monocultures, which have supplanted the beautiful stream valleys and varied landscapes of yesteryears, especially after the land consolidations. I think of the cities with human storage tables with as many floors as possible. Prestige objects in a battle for power. Control-C, Control-V, copy, paste. But is there sufficient attention for humanity, pure quality, in this quantitative reproduction compensation battle? No. Economic growth has completely overgrown our biological and therefore psychological, including moral, ethical and emotional reproduction potential. Who I am, what I want and what I can do, I can discover it in multiplicity everywhere on my multimedia devices. However, it's far from difficult to find answers to these questions in myself or in communication with people I really live with. Although there is probably already an app for that. How do we get back to ourselves and start to really see and appreciate each other and ourselves? Despite Nokia's old promise to connect people, the answer is certainly not in applying more technology or in developing better technology. It has been shown time and time again that improved technology in one aspect for which it was designed subsequently created new problems in a multitude of other aspects. For example, the car was a less polluting successor to horse and carriage. With the upscaling of mobility, it turned out to cause much more unforeseen but far more serious problems than the stinking and decaying horse droppings in the 19th century cities. The comparison with Pandora's box is inevitable. It's time for science and politics to take real responsibility for the iatrogenesis, the pathogenic effect of technology, instead of blindly investing in new disruptive technology, even though the close link between technology and the economy seems to force it. Monocultures are both not natural and they are fragile. If things go wrong, like with Corona, the necessary items are by definition in the wrong place because there are no more self-sufficient systems anywhere. Repetition, copy-paste, that results from upscaling is also repetition of side effects, such as decreasing diversity. Nature is colorful, full of variety, and is home to the most diverse species. Exact repetition is non-existent. People are also colorful, diverse and unique. Unfortunately, they are less and less unique and diverse in the monocultures that have started to overshadow us, even though so many people are living right now. Can't we do better? As I said, with our youngest daughter, my wife and I moved to our small-scale museum. So last July we moved to the museum village of Oud-Aalden, where the village square was the central place, as in all Dutch Saxon cent villages. From the village square, the village shepherd brought the collected cattle to the communal pastures. At the end of the day, the sheep or other livestock were returned to the square. From there, each animal found its way back to its own farm and stable. New farms were also built around the village square, making the square even more central over time. Various mathematical principles are visible here: attractors, game theory, etc. We will discuss the game theoretic principle that later became known as the tragedy of the commons, because this principle has for centuries determined the cooperative mentality. Just behave normal. Then it's crazy enough. What's about that? The community in the Saxon villages consisted of peasant families who worked the land around the villages cooperatively. The livestock raised for wood, milk and meat clearly had limited pastures. Each family had a number of animals and was in principle able to increase its wealth by getting more animals. However, the shared pastures were not endless, and if there were too many animals, overgrazing could disrupt the sheep-grass balance and spoil the pastures and lead to poverty. None of the animals would receive adequate nutrition. Whereas a farmer could build a larger sheepfold than his neighbor, keeping more sheep would sooner or later drive the communal flock over the equilibrium point, resulting in poverty for all. Therefore, the entire community, the whole system, kept a close eye on whether individual members continued to fall in line. This mathematical principle, called the tragedy of the common, is related to the Nash equilibrium of John Nash, about whom the beautiful Hollywood film A Beautiful Mind was made. The Saxon farms, which now have the national monumental status, are inhabited by people with modern professions. Nevertheless, we were asked whether we would seek to connect with the village character. The Vorden structure, now of an intact historic farming village, is still decimating overly exuberant display and behavior, even though the pastures are no longer used for the collective livestock to graze. The notion of extended mind helps to understand this. Just as clothing can be seen as an outsourced function of the skin, keeping it warm, the monumental living environment can be seen as an outsourced behavioral and cognitive organization, referring to a world in balance, even though it may not have been rich. This is in stark contrast to today's worlds of smart technology, where of course the same method applies, the tragedy of the commons, but where no one knows how individual behavior can restore collective balance. The consequences of individual behavior, one car ride or plane trip more or less, on the collective level of our existence have completely disappeared from view, while unfortunately overgrazing of a beautiful planet is in the order of the day. Every day species are dying. There is hunger and war in the less fortunate places on Earth, and obesity and overconsumption in our enlightened world. Due to the increase in scale, due to digital technology, we are increasingly losing sight of our common grounds. Our behavior becomes bizarre, almost psychotic, but decimated by social media. In these big tech village squares, we are both consumer producers and products, like the sheep of yesteryear, overstimulated and overfed by hyperfood, craving human contact. I enjoy our regained freedom in the Saxon village, but think of a variation of the words of John F. Kennedy. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of the world. In this case, of a village. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Dorfbewohner, a village inhabitant.
Blue is the kind of color that I see.
Consequences of scaling up through smart technology. On her iPad, my horse-crazy daughter showed 45 horses that broke out and galloped at full speed through the center of a small Dutch village. After about 5 minutes, they returned neatly to their stable. Miraculously, no damage was done. Instigator was a big pony who had had a career as a jockey horse and saw a hole in the defense when she was brought back into the stable. The rest fled after her. No problem, she returned them safely. Prey animals can flee and act as one collective machine. On the other hand, predators behave completely differently. Our dogs, for example, do respond to each other's deviant behavior, but approach the world from their individual needs. Wolves hunt together, while each has its own task. We humans have characteristics of both prey and predators. Great apes are also roughly in the middle of the food chain. Although technology, fire, leverage and language has enabled us to maneuver ourselves upwards on our own. Immediately after my 11-year-old girl showed me the fleeing horses, she showed a video on TikTok of Charlie D'Amelio, an American 16-year-old girl. Charlie has been making videos on TikTok since 2019, in which she dances in front of the mirror. She now had 84 million followers, 6.3 billion likes. She only followed 1,018 people herself, who turn out to be her most loyal fans. She was apparently in the right place at the right time. The most special thing about her is the number 1 position she reached. This refers to her herd behavior, very different from the people who sometimes manage to reach a few million admirers with very exceptional performances. As an artist, I think of Glenn Gould, for instance, or the Two Cellos, or as a genius, for example, Einstein or Elon Musk, or as an aggressor. From our evolutionary middle position, we can cherish the ordinary, normal, such as Charlie, or the sublime, or unattainable, like David Helfgott, for example, who played Rachmaninoff's impossible, difficult piano concertos as one of the first. The fleeing herd animal or the individualized predator.